This tutorial is about the use of resizeable in responsive design of web apps. Resizeable is the ability for the user to drag a div to make it smaller or larger. This ability allows the user to make some decisions about the layout of elements on the screen, rather than them just responding to the size of the screen in normal responsive design. Our first example is pure CSS. So we've linked to a CSS style sheet here. The HTML, we've got 3 divs: top menu, div 1 and div 2. There's nothing else within the HTML that determines the use of resizeable. Within the CSS, there are 2 important attributes: resize horizontal for div 1, resize vertical for the top menu. The resize vertical produces this ability. Resize horizontal produces this horizontal ability. We can also have resize both, that it would allow a vertical and a horizontal resizing of the same div. The next example uses 2 range inputs, some CSS and a little JavaScript, to control the size of the divs that we want to make resizable. The HTML is very similar to the structure that we had before, but we've now added these range inputs. One we're calling a class of scale, a range from 0 to 100, an initial value of 60, and on change calling the JavaScript update column width. That is the horizontal slider here. And if we move it to one side, you can see a corresponding change in the width of the divs here. The vertical slider, if I drag it, you can see we're controlling the vertical height. Very intuitive, because the button that we drag is alongside the boundary of the divs that we want to drag. And this is class vScale, and apart from that, it's a very similar input range, 0 to 100, initial value 60. And the JavaScript is in resizeable slider.js. The basic operation of the JavaScript is very straightforward. The horizontal range input calls update column width with a value from the slider. So if I adjust the slider, that updates this function. This value is then set to set the style of div 1 and to calculate the style for div 2. In the same way, the vertical slider calls the function update top menu height. If I adjust this, this sends a value which is then used to set the style height of the top menu div. Instead of the user having to reset the size of these divs each time they use the app, we can store the selected values in local storage, so that each time the user makes a change to their selected width, then we can store this as local storage set item, and I'm calling this frame width, storing the value. In the same way, we can store the value for the height of the top menu. So local storage, set item, top height, and again we store the value. When the user first starts on load, we use the function setColumnWidth, and we read from local storage. So local storage getItem the frame width and local storage getItem top height. If there is no information stored in this and we get a null value, it will use these default values. So we've got a variable for the value from frame width and another variable for the value from top height. And then we can simply set these as the style width for div 1, calculate the width for div 2, set the value for top height. So this will now reinitialize the app to the same settings as the user used the last time they visited this app. The CSS for this demonstration for the web page itself is just the normal CSS that you would expect. There's nothing different here from the examples that we used earlier. The slider needs a lot more complex styling. So to style the range input, we enclose each within a div that has a scale class for the horizontal and a v-scale for the vertical. These have been positioned absolutely, and the parent page, the parent CSS, is also positioned absolute to ensure that they remain aligned with each other. We've given them a z-index that's high to make sure that they go over the top of the contents of the div. Range type inputs need some quite complex CSS, and the best way of getting this is from an online website that generates the CSS code that you need. The horizontal and the vertical use the same values for the appearance. The vertical scale needs a transform to rotate it 90 degrees. The width is set to 100% of the height, and we give it a left margin of -50. This moves it half the width of the screen to the left. Rotating it without this margin would place it in the middle of the screen. The margin left, -50, moves it to the left where you see here. Our next example uses jQuery to produce the resizeable effect. We've styled the page to give us a border that indicates where the resize can be done. So the blue border of the top div can be dragged to resize the top div, and the red border of the left-hand div here can be dragged to resize the left-hand and right-hand panes. The HTML is the same as before. We're just including the jQuery code. The CSS is very similar to before. The overflow X hidden and overflow Y hidden allow us to remove the scroll bars where we want the coloured border for dragging. Border bottom, solid blue. Border right, solid red. The JavaScript is also quite straightforward. We declare the divs that we want to be resizable, and in this case we're declaring all three to be resizable. Declaring them in this way means that we've got an icon in the corner and the border of the div can be dragged. When that is dragged, JavaScript jQuery controls the action and calls the resize function. So if we drag the border of the top menu, we can then set the height of div 2 to be the parent height minus the height of top menu, and the same for div 1. If we resize div 1, we can change the width to be the width of the parent minus the width of div 1. And we also need to include the width of the border, even though we're using box resizing in this example. So if we dragged div 2, again we can change the value of div 1. If the window itself is resized, we also want to resize our divs in proportion. So all three divs can then be reset to their new values. The working code, examples of web pages and further information are all available from my website at the link given on the screen and below.